Private equity culture clashes. Are we going to see tribal warfare? When it comes to the private equity, it is a very large global industry. It's got 100,000 people working in the industry directly, with perhaps another 50, 60,000 LPs and service providers. It's been estimated that there's something between 7,000 and 9,000 private equity firms worldwide. So it's normal to think that they're going to be very different people from very different backgrounds. And these people have very different ways and styles of doing things. And what we're going to look at today is some of the commonly found, for want of a better word, tribes that you might find in the industry. And the other thing we're going to look at is how some of the different cultures of the various groups may come into a clash or result in a different perspective on things. I'm going to look at 5 or 6 examples of this. The first culture clash, which is the most common one, which is the most debated in the industry, is the clash of investment banking types versus operating types. And here is what it's about. It's part of the debate about what skills or experience a private equity fund manager needs at the most fundamental level. The investment banking camp argues that private equity fund managers are basically people who need transaction skills. So skills such as valuation, deal structuring, due diligence, all of which we could describe as some kind of investment banking skill. On the other side, we have people who argue that private equity fund managers need operating skills. This means people who understand what makes companies tick, who can relate to entrepreneurs, who themselves may have direct experience of company operations as a corporate executive, or as an entrepreneur, or as an SME owner, for example. And the debate goes on periodically over the years, and the pendulum swings between the operating types and the investment banking types. Typically, in times of crisis, the pendulum swings back towards the operating types because there's a retrenchment and a concentration on the existing portfolio. And when the time passes, things get back to normal, the transaction types now become more important because we're now back in the market and making deals. Honestly, it's a futile debate because the private equity skill set is really a combination of both of these. So there's really no point in continuing to argue which of the two it should be when it's a distinctly third one. It's true that investment bankers do not know so much about company operations, but they have transaction skills and are multi-sector. It's true that operating types lack investment skills and are more mono-sector, but in their area they know companies from various perspectives. There has yet to be a definitive study produced which is going to settle this debate, and there probably never will be such a study. The second culture clash you get is, let's say, the rivalry between what we could describe as the LP Shmoozers and the Coalface guys. And so in some firms, particularly in some of the bigger firms, you have people who position themselves to stay close to the LPs and spend a lot of time briefing LPs and interacting with LPs, whereas others may just get on with managing the portfolio. What the LP Schmoozers are looking to do is to put themselves in a strong position because they see power flowing from relations with the LP, and therefore you might get an internal tension between those people who the Coalface guys feel are spending too much time schmoozing the LPs to further their position and adding no value to the portfolio. This will result in a conflict with the Schmoozers, who see themselves as more powerful than the Coalface guys because they are the kind of fiduciaries of the LPs and filter the Coalface guys. They try to reposition the Coalface people as technical execution people, and that's a source of tension within firms. The third cultural clash involves the large funds versus the mid-cap funds. And here the difference can be very stark. If you are joining a large fund, assuming you're not one of the handful of founders who founded these firms years ago, you are an employee. If you're joining a mega fund, you're going to be fresh out of business school or some other firm before you join the mega fund. So you move from an existing job to joining a mega fund. So you continue, you join the mega fund, you get a salary, you get your bonus. And so it's a bit like joining an investment bank. What's not happened if you've joined the mega funds is that you've never been out there in the wilderness, trying to raise your own fund without any income. To raise a mid-cap fund, you are truly a financial entrepreneur. And you'll find that you can distinguish fund managers like this. And so the two categories, those who've paid their dues of raising a fund without being underwritten by somebody, and the mega fund guys who are basically employees with box-ticking CVs. And that will have an effect on how people see things, particularly in the mid-cap sector, where you have to relate to smaller companies and mid-sized companies and entrepreneurs. Having raised your own fund will give you a possibility to relate to them better. Let's turn to culture clash number 3. In the market is the Anglo-American approach versus the European approach. The Anglo-American approach is a bit more towards buyouts, it's a bit more towards financial engineering, it looks more at purely shareholder value. The European approach looks at a wider range of stakeholders. What we see is that many of the big American firms who have operations outside of the US, like in Europe and Asia, they generally hire what we could describe as proto-American locals. Locals who've been to a US business school and speak the language of the Americans, so they feel comfortable hiring them. And this sometimes limits the scope of the local operations because some of the other locals may not relate to the proto-Americans so well. Culture clash number 4 we see in emerging markets. Particularly, it is a development type against the financial types. So if you're a commercial private equity fund manager, even in the mid-cap, you probably have a background in business or accounting or some professional background in the private sector. Whereas the development types may have studies in public policy or development and work for NGOs or the public sector or for development financial institutions. And so you've got the financial types who are in it for the money to make a business career, although they may be good citizens in themselves and try to do the right thing in their investments. And then we have the development types who have a more development type mission. And so what you'll get here is that you may get a lack of mutual respect, with the financial investment types feeling that the development types are kind of incapable and not disciplined from a business point of view. And the financial types may be resenting the holier than thou or sanctimonious attitudes of some of the development types. Certain types of development people may have ideological hostility against commercial private sector people. On the other hand, the development types are not always wrong because they may sometimes be wary of recently discovered impact or social good missions that the financial types have suddenly found because it may suit them for fundraising purposes and be very topical. So development types are often against financial types for some kind of cultural reason. This clearly doesn't help the countries that they're trying to help in emerging markets if it gets in the way of good investments, if it's just about a clash between two Western factions while the local emerging markets people sit there by the window and watch it play out, bemused. Culture clash number 5 is the expatriate issue. Many operations you'll get in emerging markets may have a mixture of locals and expatriates. By expatriate, I mean a Western professional, usually Western European or North American, who relocates to another area or another region in order to work as a fund manager. And what we get is a certain tension as well. We have a certain amount of thinking among particularly developmental financial institutions that you must, in the long term, empower the locals, which is true. This ultimately means that they see that the expatriates as people that should be phased out and they should lose their jobs. And so many headquarters types on the development side back at home tend to look for policies that favour locals and eliminate expatriates, even if it does not make sense at that point in time for the operation. And sometimes it's plain old resentment because some mid-level bureaucrats sitting in Brussels may perceive the expatriates as having a great gin and tonic tax-free lifestyle somewhere, and they want to cut them down to size. There are bad expatriates, not getting involved locally, always absent, but these are quite rare in private equity operations. Okay, so these are some examples of different cultural clashes that you might see in private equity, and all of them may have the effect of creating dysfunctionality within GP operations, either among the team themselves or because of the LPs having some kind of prescriptive ideological idea. Ultimately, for successful GPs, you need a cohesive team. A team should be made of people with diverse backgrounds. There should be space for everybody, developmental types, expatriates, locals, investment banking guys, operational guys, proto-Americans, and all the rest. Private equity is ultimately a pragmatic and cross-functional discipline, and so it's really about making a diverse team work and avoiding prescriptive ideologies.